So as I was saying, the bank and the borrower form a partnership entity, both providing capital at an agreed percentage to purchase the property. The partnership entity will then rent out the property to the borrower and charge rent. So the bank and the borrower will then share the proceeds from this rent based on the current equity share of the partnership. At the same time, the borrower in the partnership entity also buys back the bank's share of the property at an agreed regular interest rate or installment. If default occurs during the repayment period, the bank and the loaner will split the value of the property based on each party's current equity. So basically, we see you have the down payments. They don't call it down payment. They call it you're buying back your own property. It's sort of like a share buyback program from a company, for instance. And you have the rent, which acts as the sort of interest rate, right? For instance, if you have 10% capital and your interest rate is say 10,000 SAR, interest again, sorry, your rent is 10,000 SARs a month. It's a high rent, by the way, but then you'll you'll be paying 1,000 to yourself and 9,000 to the bank, and then of course you'll have the installments, and this figure will change as time goes along. Most commonly here in the GCC countries is that you have a fixed rent, which would be the equivalent of having a fixed interest rate mortgage, which many people have. I know in Malaysia, for instance, they've been experimenting with ways of making it floating. How do they do that? You can link the rental price to, for instance, a rental index, for instance, in the region you live. There are many ways of doing it. So basically, from my point of view, it is sort of just a matter of working around the systems. It sounds almost like looking for, sort of a little bit looking for loopholes, but this is the way the system is. Another interesting part of the Islamic finance is the sukuk. Sukuk is the Arabic name for financial certificates, but it commonly refers to the Islamic equivalent of bonds. It's the same issue here. You can't have interest-bearing bonds as they're not permissible in Islam, and the sukuk securities therefore have to be structured to comply with Islamic law. A little fun fact here. You'll very often hear, especially Westerners who are not native Arabic speakers, referring to sukuks with the S on the end when they refer to Islamic bonds. This is actually incorrect. Sukuk is a plural word. The correct forms are sak, that's a singular, and sukuk is plural. So a good analogy is if you add an S at the end of the English word children's. That's not correct if you're talking about a child or a plural version. Anyhow, I'm not going to give you too much detailed information on how the sukuk market functions. But in principle, it's the same as an Islamic loan. You enter into a partnership, you take an ownership stake in the company or government or whatever who's issuing the bond, and you're then compensated for it. Sheikh Mohammed Taik Usmani, who is president of the Sharia Council, the Accounting and Audit Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, has said that the following must be present to separate a sukuk from a regular bond. Sukuk must represent ownership shares in asset or commercial industrial enterprise that bring profits or revenue. Payment to sukuk holders should be the share of profits after cost of the asset or enterprise. The value payable to the sukuk holder on maturity should be the current market value of the asset or enterprise and not the principal originally invested. The reason he has said this is that he has also said previously that through complex mechanism or a little bit of financial engineering, many of the modern Islamic bonds out there are started taking on the same characteristics as conventional interest-bearing bonds. He actually went so far in 2007 to say that 85% of all Islamic bonds were in fact not in compliance with Sharia law. Of course, I'm not an expert, and I cannot comment on that. I know nothing about Sharia law. The sukuk market was also hit by the financial crisis, as was the whole world, but it has started to bounce back. Currently, they are projecting very strong growth going forward. We'll have to wait and see. I can give you an example. Recently, remember in previous sections I talked about the Total Aramco joint venture. They issued a 1 billion US dollars sukuk the other day, which was oversubscribed 3.5 times. I just include this to show that this is something businesses can use. It's not only for, Islamic government or something like that. It's a market which is, it makes sense. It's a real alternative, especially in the region. Of course, the sukuk market is a small market, or a small percentage of the world financial market, but it's not negligible. You can't forget it, and it's growing fast. And of course, based on the fact that there's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, there's no doubt that it has potentially a very large market. But also for non-Muslims, it's worthwhile to think about, especially if you're doing business in the region, as for instance Total has done. I'll give you another example. Say you are a Norwegian company operating a rig here in the Gulf. You want to raise money in the market, but we're in a financial crisis, the capital markets, there's not much bond issuing going on back in Norway that I know. This is a region where a lot of cash has been accumulated due to the financial crisis. Due to the high oil prices prior to the financial crisis, and also the oil prices has been quite resilient after. It only dropped quite quickly, but it rebounded also. Currently quite high now in historical terms. So it might be worthwhile checking it out. Many countries are realizing the value of the sukuk market or Islamic finance market. London is trying to position itself as the Islamic finance hub. Hong Kong is doing a little bit of the same. I know Kuala Lumpur also is trying. Iran is the biggest market for financial or Islamic finance, followed by Saudi Arabia. And Malaysia is also quite big, and they're most famous for their government bonds. That concludes the finance sector. Moving on to healthcare. This sector is relatively short compared to its size. It's basically because I'm not an expert on it. I don't really have any information that's worthwhile and really valuable commentary on this one. At the same time, I couldn't leave it out just because it's such a big part of the market here in Saudi Arabia, such an important economical thing in the country. Basically, the health sector in Saudi Arabia is a mix of private and government. You have both public hospitals and you have private hospitals. Then again, the MOH, which is the Ministry of Health, oversees everything and basically pays for most of it, similar to what the NHS, or National Health Service in Britain, for instance. So, bottom line is more or less public and private run as a mix, but is publicly funded, most of it. Currently, there are roughly 1,950 health stations around the country and 220 hospitals. This is also set to grow strongly in the years to come. Currently, in the next 5-year plan, there are plans to build 15 new hospitals and 750 health stations. The public health budget has leapfrogged by 12% in 2011. Now, why is this happening? Of course, there's, like I talked about previously, growing population. Population is getting older. This really doesn't explain the whole issue. One of the big problems is, of course, lifestyle diseases. Culturally, I talked about the obsession with driving cars. People do not really live a very healthy life. There is the diet here is not that great. There are many. Obesity is quite bad, and all the problems which follow. Diabetes is one of the highest percentages in the world. This is, of course, very sad, and I know the government is working to try to change it. The problem is that it's a cultural issue. It's hard to regulate what people eat, and I don't really see it changing in the immediate future, at least. As I said, this is very sad, but I cannot not mention it. That from a foreign perspective, this is a big opportunity. The health market in Saudi Arabia is huge. It is growing. It's a cash-rich country who wants to spend money on healthcare as part of the social contract between the government and the ruling royal family. I myself have worked this fall on a project with a Norwegian company selling equipment for individuals who are suffering from diabetes. So it's definitely worthwhile checking out if you're in the market. That concludes this section. Please follow us to section 9, which is a summary, and also we'll talk about the challenges going forward for Saudi Arabia, especially as a whole. Thank you very much.